Hey, I'm Chris, and welcome to episode 21 of the Reunion Church podcast. This is Sunday Recaps, where we discuss a couple key points from the previous service and help you navigate the spiritual formation process. And things are a little different this week. We have a new guest, first time on the podcast, but not new to us here at Reunion Church. He's been here for a minute. This is Justin. Justin, why don't you go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself, like what you do at the church, and then just a little bit about yourself before we get going.
I'm no one special. I just showed up one day and they said, cool. Um, no, I'm the next gen youth pastor. So it's high school, college age. I've been doing youth ministry since I was in high school. Thanks to, Pastor Andrew and, he helping me come to the Lord back in high school, inviting me to youth group. And so it became such a life-changing thing that it just became a passion after that. So doing it ever since, love it, and been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of a lot of really cool churches. And now here I am with Reunion.
Yeah, and actually, this last Sunday you taught week 9 of the Grace Talk series, which was on obedience. Before we get into that, can you kind of just talk about like why youth ministry? Because like a lot of people like that listen to podcasts and just listen to church world in general, like why in the world would somebody do youth ministry voluntarily? Like what
I know.
is the point? Like,
and for free.
yeah, and for free. Yeah, like what's your heart behind it, man? Like why do you have this calling?
I think it was because I saw the impact it made on my life as a high schooler, because I grew up in a family where like half of them were Pentecostal, half of them were Southern Baptist.
Oh,
And so
mixed
like
kid.
it was very extreme and I didn't really know what to believe.
Right.
And so I kind of pushed away religion and Jesus and all that stuff, and I just really wasn't for it. And because of that, I didn't really have good morals. I was smoking and drinking in elementary school and middle school, like doing really stupid stuff at a really very young age. And
Sure.
Andrew came along in biology class of all things and kept inviting me to youth group, and I kept saying, nah, that's not for me. It's not what I do. And then one day I just cracked and I was like, I could probably use this whole Jesus thing. And so he picked me up, went to youth, and I fell in love with it. It was unlike any other church experience I've ever had before. You go from very legalistic style teaching to very, relational teaching. It's more about love. It's the relationship that you have. And so for me, it was just really that was impactful. And so, as I started to change my morals, my views, my values in life, I noticed what it saved me from. And like a lot of those people that I was hanging out with in high school, a lot of them are actually dead now because, everything they smoked, I smoked, everything they drank, I drank, and whatever they did, I did. And now here they all are, for the most part, meth overdose, they died, drinking and driving, they died. And so it's, looking back at what meeting Andrew saved me from, just what youth group did for me as a teenager. I want to do that for other people. I want to be that Andrew for other people, just like what he was for me. He was that good role model that I needed, and a good definition of what a man of God really is. And I want to now be that for those people, those students, whether you know Jesus or you don't. I want to help lead you in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the work that you have been doing for the church has been really cool. Just seeing, as the youth pastor of our church, really the next gen pastor, being able to help the next generation has been really cool. So if anyone on the podcast who's listening, anyone listening to the podcast has middle schoolers, high schoolers, or is college aged, Justin's your guy to talk to. He can, have those conversations that can be kind of tough. But as far as the conversation for tonight or today, sorry, we're filming at night. So, what was your teaching really about? Like, we've been talking a lot about grace. We've been talking about the different aspects and areas of how grace impacts us. What was kind of the focus of your message, and what was kind of the gist of it, man?
So it was basically on obedience. We all know that we're saved by grace, not by deeds, but there's still something to be said about being obedient, and what that looks like, how we can really, I guess, lose obedience. That's not really how I worded it in here, but it's what can really ruin essentially obedience, and like
Yeah.
unbelief, and what's the source of our obedience, and um how that leads into sanctification, and how humility and faith really is the key for obedience. And it was a hard topic to teach, because it's something that even I struggle with, but it's one of those things where, like, when you teach it, you learn it better.
Mhm.
So it was very interesting that I had to pick that of all the ones that I had to teach on, this
Yeah.
was the hardest one. And of course I
Right.
have
Yeah. Yeah. Very relatable, since last week I taught on relationships as the only single pastor. So
to.
totally
Funny how that
understand
works.
your dilemma there.
Yeah.
Um, just from a leadership perspective, just from a pastoral perspective, Justin, what did you think of your teaching overall? Like, what was the highlight? Like, just overall thoughts, and then what was one way you could kind of improve upon how the teaching went?
Um, I think my strengths rely on um authenticity. Like, when I can make a message personal and I
Mhm.
can make it relatable, that's so, like, when I write up a message, that's what it's all about.
Right.
It's not about me, but I can make it personal. I can make it authentic, like where it's not scripted. And
Yeah.
so, in some of this, I was able to do that, share a couple stories. The thing that I could probably work on is, I've never really taught a, out of a book before, and with this whole series, it's a very amazing laid out platform about God's grace. And I'm learning a lot. Like, when
Yeah.
you think you know a lot, and all of a sudden you learn about something like this, you realize you know nothing at all. And so the fact that I have to rewrite something that's already been so perfected and so good, it's hard for me to make that authentic and make it my own. So,
Yeah.
that was kind of a struggle for me in this whole series, is trying to make it personal. But I think it went really well. I mean, I know, in our group that we had really good conversations with two random strangers that just walked into the doors, like,
Yeah.
we wanted coffee, but we heard you're doing church, so let's do church. And it was just such a
Right.
cool experience, that out of nowhere. And then to hear one of the ladies say, like, this is why I was here tonight. Like, what you said, I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
And so that was impactful, because we are our worst critics. And so
Oh yeah.
I always think I preach the worst messages until I have students, or I have, like, this, that really nice lady. I forget her name already. Forgive me. Um,
Carolyn and Joanne, I believe, or Joni.
Dude, how do you do that? I can't remember names to save my life. That's a gift.
I wrote it down. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Outreach pastor. I got to write names down when I meet people. So
Smart.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like, it was super cool to hear, when I think I spoke poorly, and I hear, like, my wife, she doesn't really get to hear me speak that much.
Yeah.
But when she does, the feedback she gives, the honesty, hearing it from Andrew and hearing it from her, saying that, man, I really needed to hear that. Like, that's why I came here today. It
Right.
wasn't just for the coffee. It was, she needed to hear that word.
Mhm.
And so that was pretty awesome. I like the small group discussions that we had.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and just kind of to jump off of that last point, which I always think is interesting for, pastors who are married. Like, it's kind of interesting. Like, I know there's some pastors like Andrew where sometimes they can get more nervous if,
Mhm.
say, Andrew's wife Hannah is in the room when he's preaching, and it kind of throws him off sometimes. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's still the case, but I know it was for a while. And then there's other pastors where they feel like they teach better with their spouse in the room. Where do you kind of fall in those two categories? Like,
Honestly, I don't know. I don't think it really affects me. Like, I like it when
yeah.
she's there, because I know she's going to be supportive, and
Mhm.
she'll laugh at all my dumb jokes when nobody else will. So
Right.
it's like, I appreciate that, so I don't feel so bad. um, but yeah, I don't think that really bothers me as much. It's more, what I guess worries me or scares me the most when I teach, is when somebody that I've never met before comes in, because I don't know you. I
Yeah.
don't know how to talk around you. I don't know if this is, it's like, I
Right.
feel like I'm walking on thin ice. But luckily, before I taught, I got to get to know those two ladies. And so I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So I can literally just be me in this and it
Yeah.
feel comfortable. It felt normal,
Mhm. Okay. Nice, man. Nice. Yeah. I mean, it's just always something that some pastors will talk about, of like the difference of how it changes the room. Um, so obedience, grace, what the heck? How are they related? What's the correlation? I thought grace was free. What role does obedience play in the grace process?
So I think there's a lot that, like, and it is one of those like kind of double-edged swords or oxymorons almost, like it sounds like.
Yeah.
We're like, well, if I'm saved by grace, then why do I need deeds? Or what's the purpose of being obedient if I just have grace? And
Right.
so I can see the wheels turning in some people's heads when they think about that. But I think a lot of obeying really starts to come, you start to notice that sanctification process, that the process of you're being transformed into the likeness of Christ, but it's a progressive transformation. And you start to notice that likeness in Christ come through obedience. And one of the questions on here is, or it's more of a statement, is his love transforms us to obey. And through that transformation, it's almost like it's not that we can't do bad things. It's not that we can't do this, we can't do that, we have to do this, we have to do that. It's that relationship I have with God is so special. It's so meaningful. It's so impactful that I don't want to do those things. It's not that I can't. It's that I'm choosing now to be obedient, and it's more so out of love because He first loved me, instead of almost like a burden. And that was one of the discussions that we kind of had, was like, are you only obedient out of fear? Fear of hell, fear of punishment, or are you actually being obedient because of the relationship that you have?
Yeah.
So, but a lot of that relationship comes from humility, understanding that I cannot do it myself. God, I need you. And then faith.
Mhm.
The Bible says that we can't even please God without having faith.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to please God without faith. And so when you mix humility and faith together, it starts to create um that obedience factor, I guess. Those are the two important factors
Mhm.
in obedience.
Mhm. Do we have to obey as Christians? Do we have to obey God?
Well, I mean, yes, we should. Um, but I mean, it's the whole free will thing. Should we? Yes. Do we all the time? No. And it's, again, kind of touching up on grace. It's
Yeah.
the grace of God that, He gives me a second chance to try again.
Yeah.
I think as Christians, yes, we should obey. It's pretty apparent. The Bible says we should obey these things.
Mhm.
Um, but then again, it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So it's,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's such a tricky subject.
Right. Yeah. And I think what's tough too is like when you bring up the whole obedience concept and idea to somebody, there can be a lot of pushback of like, well, you do you, man. Like, I get you live this way. This is your thing. Judge not, Matthew 7, whatever, misquoted, all those verses misquoted. Is there like any scriptural evidence of like what obedience looks like in the Bible? Like, because that's gonna be something that people bring up, like, well, this verse says judge not. So why do I need to obey what Jesus tells me? Right? Wasn't he just landlocked into the culture of his time? Like, does anything he say really matter in my life? Like, wasn't he just a good teacher? Like, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think one of the verses that we go over practically every weekend is Ezekiel. Ezekiel 36, 26 and 27, which again, I like the NLT version because it's a little bit more descriptive, but it's really the Holy Spirit will supply your need for obedience. It's that's kind of like my heading for it, is like, if I was to describe this, in the verses, and I will give you a new heart and I will put in you a new spirit. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. And I will put my spirit in you. And this is the part about obedience, really, is that I will put my spirit in you so that you will follow my decrees and be careful to obey my regulations.
Mhm.
And I think that careful is part of where that free will part kind of comes in, because it's not saying you must, it's saying be careful to obey these things, meaning you'll probably fail, but don't worry, my grace will cover that. You know what I mean? um but what I see in this is that when there's a new spirit put inside me, the old me is gone,
Mhm.
and I have this new spirit inside of me. In a way, it's like, again, it's not that I have to obey, it's that I want to obey.
Right.
That his spirit is what's transforming me, it's changing me, it's developing me into the likeness of Christ. And because Christ obeyed up until the time of death on the cross, even, that starts to transform my heart and how I don't need to be obedient, but I want to be obedient.
Mhm. And so you get saved, it's day one, all this stuff's kind of like a flash of light, right? It's all brand new. When you get to the obedience part, how do you kind of wrap your head around that? Like, is it something that we do, that we have to actively try, or is it more so something like, how do you navigate that of like, hey, you're a day one believer, here's your one sentence spiel of what obedience is in the Christian walk?
Well, I think it comes in phases, because I guess the way I look at it is that you can't obviously run until you learn how to walk,
Mhm.
and so it's in the beginning, as you become a Christian, you start to learn kind of the do's and the don'ts, and for the most part, because here in America where we live, our beliefs are biblical beliefs. It's do not murder, do not steal, do not, but that's all over the world too. It's
Right.
not just us, that's all over the world. And so we know those things that we shouldn't do. But I think as Christians, when we start to unfold and really peel back the layers of the Bible, and we start to see characteristics of God and who Jesus was, and we start to identify our identity and how he sees us, um, that obedience factor starts to almost feel normal, somewhat natural, you know? And it's kind
Mhm.
of like how, like I said, his love transforms us to obey. So
Yeah.
once we start to experience and acknowledge that love that he has for us, little by little, it starts to transform us. That's where that sanctification process comes in, is it's a progressive transformation. It's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to be a Christian today and then perfect tomorrow.
Mhm.
It's being confident in this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day
Mhm.
of Christ Jesus. So this is a progression. This is going to happen every day. You're going to screw up some days and backtrack, and that's okay. God's grace covers that. Keep moving forward, keep pushing on. And I think you start to learn how to obey better when you start to experience really what his love is, what it's done for you, what it's going to
Yeah.
continue to do for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of based on what you said, it sounds like the source of our obedience is not from ourselves, right?
Exactly.
It's from God. Um,
Mhm.
you actually kind of ended your sermon with this kind of cool duality between Old Testament and New Testament to kind of like bring everything together. Can you kind of share what that means, like what it was and what that means as far as how to live this day to day? Because I know, some people might hear what you just said and think, well, okay, if obedience is all from God, if He's the source, then I don't have free will, right? Like it's not, I, He's got it, right? Is that how it works, or like what?
So
What's the
it,
practical take?
so my whole thing is like, then I'll word this two different ways, I guess. My description of like what's the difference between the Old Testament and New Testament, or the old law and the New Testament, is that back in the day, the Old Testament, it was, here's 613 Levitical laws. Do not break any of these laws. Good luck, you know. And it was essentially do good, get God, right?
Yeah.
You have to show him and prove to him, sacrifice all these things to prove that I deserve salvation. And all of a sudden Jesus comes into the picture and he's like, no, 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 no. You just believe in me. You have faith in me.
Right.
Let me do all the work. And it became more of a Jesus did good, so now you get God,
Yeah.
and it has nothing to do with us and everything to do with what he's already done and what he's continuing to do, in and through you.
Mhm.
And so I think that free will still stands because again, no one's forcing you to be obedient. It's not that I can't, look at porn. It's not that I can't cheat on my wife. It's not that I can't lie or steal. It's
Right.
I love you so much, God, and I appreciate and I'm grateful for everything you've done. I don't want to do those things. It's not that I can't, it's that my relationship with you is more important than my own desires. And so that's where that free will kind of balances out. It's you still have free will.
Yeah.
You don't have to obey, but his love will transform you to obey. It's not that
Mhm.
he's forcing you now, it's that now you want to obey. You don't want to do these things anymore.
Right. Yeah. Kind of like how, people talk about there's two major changes in someone's life, the day after they get married and the day after they have a kid, they
Hmm.
just radically change in the way their priorities and everything lines up.
Yeah.
Um, Before we kind of move on just to, the small groups and all that, real quick, any final thoughts as far as your message or um, just what you think is relevant to the obedience conversation when it comes to the grace process?
Um, I would say the one thing that can ruin obedience is unbelief, and that was one of the things that we kind of talked about was there's definitely ways that you can ruin obedience.
Mm.
And again, that comes down to a self-confidence issue, and it's one of those things where like your failures will make you not want to try again.
Oh,
And if we put our faith in God, but we still choose not to step out in faith, our unbelief is really hindering our obedience. Because when God says go, like if you feel like God put on your heart to go pray for this person and you prayed for him and nothing happened, you're probably not going to want to pray for anyone anymore because,
right.
well, if it didn't happen the first time, what would happen this time? You know? And so you start to develop um this self-confidence issue where you don't want to try anymore. If you feel God's calling you to do something or say something, well, why? History's just going to repeat
Yeah.
itself. And so
Hmm.
something to kind of take home with you is, one thing that you can do to really, really ruin obedience is just you have too much faith in yourself
Hmm.
and you need to put that faith in God. Don't worry about what you can do. It's the whole moving in the natural so he can move in the supernatural.
Right. Right. Kind of that fear based versus faith based
Yeah.
duality. Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, we had the best group, in my
Oh yeah.
opinion, as far as small groups
Oh
go, because we were in it. Um,
yeah. Well,
what was like, because I love how small groups can kind of take what you thought was like, oh, this is great. This message went really well. The feedback is really good. But then it's like you take the message and you go into the small groups and you kind of stretch out all the ideas. What was one question or maybe one statement or just something that happened in the small group that kind of expanded upon unexpectedly what we were talking about? Like something of like, oh, never thought of it that way when it comes to grace, obedience, faith in general.
I think it was when Bethany said, um, she brought up a really good point because it's something that she struggles with and it's something that I struggle with. And it's the whole, are you only being obedient out of fear or are you being only obedient out of love? To me, that really stood out because I'm like, well, I know I'm not part of a legalistic church or religion or anything.
Yeah.
Yes, it's out of love, and I'm grateful every day for the things God's done for me, and it keeps me humble, knowing that none of that happened because of me. And another conversation that came up that I believe she even said was, she doesn't feel like she deserves this love, or she
Yeah.
doesn't feel like she deserves this grace. It's and to be completely honest with you, sure, I've been a Christian for well since 2004, and it's 2021 now. It's
Yeah.
even throughout this entire time, from everything I've studied, everything I've read, the messages that I've heard, I still, to this day, sometimes I don't believe that I deserve his grace.
Mm.
And it really just like I thought I was the only one that felt that way until I heard her heart really, and I'm like, wow, we're the same.
Mhm.
Like it was I don't know, it was a good conversation, and it helped me realize that I'm not the only one, that thinks this way.
Yeah. And just relating to that, because like I feel those struggles too. I feel those same emotions of like, man, like I got grace. Now I have to do stuff to maintain grace. I've got to,
Yeah.
now it's on me. This is a transaction. For people who have that struggle, and I think it's going to be a lot of people, how would you kind of encourage them before we kind of wrap things up and, tie up this podcast?
I mean, again, that's a hard one, because it's something that when you struggle with it, it's like, how do you answer that? And
Yeah.
I would honestly just say, like, I guess what helps me understand that I do deserve this, even though I don't. It's one of those things where we have to acknowledge a lie. You know, I feel like it's the enemy that says, you don't deserve this. You cussed out that person on the way to work or on the way home from work because they cut you off, and, blah, 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 blah. You don't deserve forgiveness for that. You understand what you just said to him? You flipped him off, or
Sure.
whatever it might be. It's like, at that point, it's like, how can I call myself a Christian, let alone a pastor, and act like that, and even think that I remotely deserve forgiveness for it? Like, what kind of Christian am I?
Yeah. Well, and even what's tough about that lie is there's some truth there of like grace is undeserved, right? So like part of it is like, yeah, it's kind of true. It is undeserved, but it's still given. It's still a
True.
gift, we don't have to do anything for it. And I always just found that amazing that grace is free and given, and you can't do anything about it. You can either
Yeah.
accept grace and all of it, you get all of it, or you get none of it, and you can deny it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it was a really good discussion. I missed out because I was doing side quests for the church. But I heard the message was awesome, man. So really encouraged by it and the feedback I heard. So we've got a couple things coming up, Reunion Church, as far as updates and just some news. So as you guys know, last week, I'm going to pull up my recap page, but essentially upcoming this week, we're not doing anything for Thanksgiving. Us as a church kind of realized Thanksgiving is more of a family day, more of an American day, not necessarily a church day. So, spend time with your loved ones, spend time with your friends, family. We're just not doing anything for Thanksgiving. And we're not going to have a service actually on the 28th after Thanksgiving. So feel free just to take the weekend, find, rest, have some Sabbath, take that time to be with those you care about. On that note, we also have a Christmas Eve service coming up. We're still finalizing the details on it, but for now, you can kind of book on your calendars that it's going to be at a similar time to what we usually do, that 5:30, 6 o'clock time on Friday, the 24th at the Reunion Church Coffee House. So go ahead and just plan on that. It's going to be Friday again, the 24th at Reunion Coffee House. It's going to be a great service for you guys. Very low-key candlelight service for now. And then again, for the women who are a part of the community but don't know, we have women's discipleship groups Wednesdays and Saturdays. For more information on that front, go ahead and contact Hannah Morrison or Bethany Trantham, and they can hook you guys up with how to join one of those discipleship groups, whether in the Reunion area or also in Littleton as well. And then lastly, man, it takes a lot to run a church, and we appreciate the support. We're actually just about to send out a newsletter this week. So go ahead and take a read of that, of what's going on in the community. And there's a lot of things happening in the community. We're trying to find a new location. So pray for that. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a lot of time and effort trying to land what that location looks like for Reunion Church going into 2022. So be with that in financial support, where you can tithe on our website and just give there, or you can also just continue to support us in prayer, and we would appreciate it as well. So on that front, any last words, Justin, before we wrap up this puppy and get back after it?
No, I mean, appreciate it. Thanks for letting me come on here. I know I missed a couple of them. I apologize.
No worries. I watch all of them, and most people don't. But anyways, we appreciate all of you who do watch the podcast. It's going to be on the website coming very soon, probably this week. So go ahead and check that out, and probably on Spotify in the coming months. So we'll catch you guys later, and happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays.